A successful cultivation of the bacteria require a large amount of awareness about the various factors which are included or which are involved in the growth of organisms, like the pH, temperature, environmental conditions and the nutritional requirement, etc. And let us now discuss the nutritional requirement of the growth of a certain microorganisms. All the organisms, including human beings, require a lot of different needs which are required for the normal functioning of a human body or any cell organelles. Now, there is a great difference or great diversity in the nutritional requirement of a bacteria and a human beings. Now, let us discuss the requirements of a typical bacteria or any microorganisms. The first, all organisms require source of energy. We have, on the basis of source of energy, we have chemotrophs and the phototrophs. Those organisms which rely on the chemical compounds for the energy, they are known as the chemotrophs, whereas those which rely on the radiant energy are termed as the phototrophs. The second is the source of electrons. All organisms require a source of electron for the cell metabolism. There are two kinds of organisms divided on such basis, that are the lithotrophs and the organotrophs. Lithotrophs are those organisms which consume or which use the reduced inorganic compounds to get the electron sources, and there are two types of lithotrophs. There are the chemolithotrophs and the photolithotrophs. Second, we have the organotrophs, which use the organic compounds to get the electron sources, and there are again two types of organotrophs, that are the chemoorganotrophs and the photoorganotrophs. Now, all organisms require carbon as a very important source, which are required for the synthesis of the cell wall components. Now, on the basis of the requirement of carbon, there are autotrophs and the heterotrophs. Autotrophs are those organisms which uses the carbon dioxide as the major and the only source of carbons, whereas the heterotrophs are those organisms which require organic compounds as their source of carbon. Now, let's discuss the organisms which require nitrogen. Now, nitrogen is also very important important requirement which are needed by the organisms. Some of the organisms consume direct nitrogen from the environment, whereas there are a lot of different organisms which require the nitrogen from the inorganic compounds like the nitrates, nitrites, ammonia, etc. And there are a lot of organisms which take their nitrogen from the organic compounds like the amino acids. Now, let us take a look about the oxygen, sulfur and the phosphorus. Now, all the organisms require oxygen, sulfur and the phosphates in the form of micronutrients, but the oxygen is generally obtained via the molecular oxygen or from water. Then we have sulfur. Sulfur is actually obtained in the form of elemental sulfur or the inorganic sulfur. Then we have the phosphorus, which are generally taken in the form of phosphates. Now, all the organisms require a lot of trace elements or the macro elements or the micro elements in the form of small metal ions, and these metal ions are the calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, iron, zinc, copper, etc. And these metal ions are known to be the cofactors for various enzymatic reactions. Next, we have the vitamins. Vitamins is also one of the important nutritional requirement for any organisms. There are certain organisms which can actually manufacture their own vitamins inside themselves, while there are certain which cannot. And these vitamins function either as a coenzyme for several enzymatic reactions, or they act as a building blocks for the coenzymes. Next, we have the water. Now, one of the most important nutritional requirement for any living organism is the water. Water is a very polar compound, and that is required and has the ability to dissolve or dissociate the organelles or the cellular components inside it. The specific heat of the water provides certain resistance to the cell from the sudden change in the temperature and the pressure. And the water is also required in many hydrolytic reactions which are carried out inside the eukaryotic cells or even prokaryotic cells. Now, let us discuss the nutritional types of the bacteria based upon the requirements they use for their growth and the multiplications. Depending upon the requirements they use, there are phototrophs, chemotrophs, autotrophs, heterotrophs and obligate parasites. There are certain organisms which comes under the phototrophs. There are those organisms which uses the inorganic compounds or the radiant energy as a source of their electron formation and the source of energy conversion, which are these are termed as the phototrophs. Next, we have the chemotrophs. These organisms require chemical compound in the form of organic and the inorganic compounds to form as a source of electrons, and these are generally differentiated into chemolithotrophs and the chemoorganotrophs depending upon the type of organic or the inorganic compounds they use. Next, we have autotrophs. Autotrophs and the heterotrophs, as we have already discussed. Let's move on to the obligate parasites. Obligate parasites are those organisms which have not been cultivated successfully into the laboratories, and these have certain nutritional requirement which are not being understood or being judged properly. So, in order to develop or in order to grow or cultivate these organisms, there is a requirement of a living host which are associated into the medium along with these organisms, and which perform the cultivation process for them. There are certain examples we have for the obligate parasites. These are the Mycobacterium leprae and the Treponema pallidum. That's all for today. Thank you.